Welcome to the show, Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain, and I am really honoured and looking forward to a conversation with the wonderful Mike McCarthy and Steve Phillip. Welcome to the show, Mike and Steve.
Thank you.
Hi, Ruth. Good to be here.
So for those that don't know Mike and Steve, so Steve is involved in suicide prevention and workplace well-being. He's an advocate in that space. He's a LinkedIn influencer, keynote speaker, consultant, and founder of the Jordan Legacy and Baton of Hope. Mike McCarthy is a world-renowned journalist who used to work for the BBC and Sky, among other organisations. He's a speaker, a campaigner for suicide prevention, awareness and change, and he's also part of the Baton of Hope Organising Committee and trustee of Men's Mental Health Charity Talk Club. Welcome. So I know both of you have very poignant stories to share, and this could be trigger conversation for some people. So I just want to raise that for anyone that is listening to this show to be aware that this could trigger some people. And before we start, I'd love to know what you are both passionate about in life right now. Mike.
I think the obvious answer is Baton of Hope, the initiative that Steve and I have launched with some other people on a great organising committee. And without sort of going on for too long about this at this early stage, I'll just say it's like, if you think Olympic torch, it's a similar kind of project in some ways, with a specially designed baton aimed at providing hope and initiating change in the field of suicide prevention. And it's what gets me up in the morning. I'm excited about it, and working with Steve is great, and I think it's going to be a fantastic initiative. Been loads of interest, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to you guys sharing what it's all about. So Steve, what are you passionate about in life?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give maybe a more general answer here, but very much in line with what Mike says. I think it is, my passion, following my own background story and the loss of my son is the difference that we can make to, saving lives. Really, that is what definitely gets me up out of bed each morning. What am I doing that's going to make that kind of difference as some kind of legacy for my son's memory, really, and which I know is really what gets Mike up as well, and just the fact that we've been able to team up two people who didn't know each other before, but have been brought together through pretty dreadful circumstances. It just gives you this kind of renewed passion in life to know you're not the only person out there kind of going through this. So yeah, that's what it's about for me. It's about can we make some kind of difference.
And I think I want to pick up on that point, is that often you think you're alone. Obviously you are alone in the grief of the experience, but the fact that so many people have been touched by suicide always astounds me. Many of my clients have had family members who have had death by suicide, including obviously from my family as well. My mum lost her father to suicide when she was only 6, and it had a huge impact on her relationship with her mother, and subsequent the relationship that I have with my mother. So it touches people in so many ways that perhaps we don't really take cognizance of in the context of the number of people that are affected by suicide, not least the people that unfortunately choose that as their option to end the pain and suffering that they're going through.
I think it's really interesting point that I can't speak for Mike, and I know certainly from my own experience that if you'd have asked me prior to Jordan's suicide, how many people I knew that had been affected by suicide. I don't know if I could have told you anyone specifically. And yet, some of the research that has been done, some of the research we've done ourselves very recently, is showing that a really very high percentage of people have been touched in some way by suicide. Good 2/3 of people that you will come across will be able to share some story of someone they know, who knows someone who's died by suicide. So you've got to ask the question then, why is it up until working in this space we didn't know about this? And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing, is to say we've really got to start opening up the conversation and not hiding this topic away.
And I think it is really so important that the topic of conversation is opened up, because there's so many people that can offer, have been in the boat that you and Mike are now in, and people that have the potential to end up in the same boat as well, is to make sure that we create that community, which I know is one of your pillars as part of your mission, to have that open dialogue that is so crucial for people to not sweep it under the carpet, as maybe it is felt it's done today, but bring it out into the open and say it's okay to not be okay. It is totally okay. There is no shame in feeling in a really dark place. It's important that we as a community work together to help people and lift them out of that darkness and give them hope. And I think we'll touch upon this as part of the conversation, but often people think happiness is the most important thing, but actually it's hope that people really need. And that's what really propels them forward. And there's been some scientific studies around this. We spend a lot of our time focusing on how can we make people more happy, and actually we need to spend more of our time focusing on how can we give people more hope, and especially around the crisis that we've had with COVID and the current situation globally at the moment, with the wars that people are involved in, and the threat of war is really, and also the environment as well, is all creating this feeling of hopelessness for some people, and it's giving people hope that I think is so important. But before we dive into that, I'd love to know, for both of you personally, in the context of your life's journey, and given this show is all about brain health, what, Mike, does optimal brain health mean for you personally? And I know you've been on the show before to talk about it on episode 18.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember what I said on the last show, but I think, acceptance is one of the big things for me. Contentment and acceptance, as you say, happiness is what we're pretty much all striving for all of the time. But I think that, happiness can only come, or contentment can only come, when you accept the situation that you're in. After we lost Ross last year, I really thought that was kind of the end of happiness and hope for me. I really did. I thought I'd just be falling through a dark void for the rest of my days. And it's interesting what you were talking about there, Ruth, about the sense of community. I think one of the things that took me out of that way of thinking was knowing that there were other people out there, like Steve, for example, who knew what I was going through. And it was a sort of light bulb moment, because I really did appreciate then, you're not alone. You and your family are not alone with this. And we often say to each other, people like ourselves who've been bereaved by suicide, we've met so many inspiring people almost kind of as a result. And, I always say, I wish I'd never met you, but I'm glad that I did. So I think if I were to pick out one word, it would be acceptance, that this is my life. This is how it's going to be. And I have to accept it. I really don't have a choice. But that process of accepting it has given me a sense of contentment. I'll always be mourning, I'll always be in grief, but I've accepted that life goes on, and this is the way that Ross would have wanted life to go on.
And thank you for sharing that, Mike, because I know it's really difficult because it's very raw for you still, and in the context of losing your son. But I think your point, acceptance, is really important as part of one of the fundamentals of brain health, because often people don't accept how they're feeling. And it comes to this brushing it under the carpet. They struggle to accept the feelings that they have, how that's driving their behaviours, how that's driving their thoughts, and how it's driving their view of life going forward, which is what you mentioned. How you can move forward in life and find that hope in life every day, and taking that time to accept your current situation, I think, is such a fundamentally important part of anybody's mental health and brain health. Because once we accept where we are in life, in whatever place that may be, then we are empowered to do something about it. But if we don't take the time to accept our current situation, it's really hard to do something about it, because we haven't had that acceptance piece for ourselves personally, and given ourselves that power to know our current state of mind, to know our current position, and then giving ourselves that permission to take action if that's what we choose to do. Steve, what would you say optimal brain health is for you personally in the context of your life story?
Well, I was just thinking I'm going to go back and listen to show 18 and see if Mike said the same thing as he's just said now. No, I think optimal brain health. Gosh, well, I have been trying to think of what's my answer for this. And contentment is a word that seems to just keep coming back for me. As Mike rightly said, you kind of wonder after what happens, has happened to us, whether you'll find any kind of contentment in life. And for me, it's not about happiness. What we're trying to do is create hope, I think, for others, and by doing so, I think we create some hope for ourselves in the process. But for me, it's just about can we find some level of contentment in life is optimal brain health, I would say. And yet, because of what we're doing, it's not always easy to find that contentment. There are so many frustrations trying to break down the barriers, trying to open up the conversation, trying to get people to do things that we know should be happening. So contentment would be the optimal goal. I'm not sure I'll ever find contentment, but if we can help people find some hope, maybe that'll give me some contentment along the way as well.
And what if you found it? How would that look like for you? What I'm curious to explore it.
I think satisfaction, maybe, Ruth. I think satisfaction that I did everything that I could do. That to make a difference. And knowing that we have made some kind of difference there, whether it's at a macro level where we have had a significant impact through Baton of Hope, to bring the numbers down significantly, and there's a tangible measure to that, or whether it's just the continual anecdotal conversations that we have and messages that I know both Mike and I get from people, who say, look, you have helped. So I think it's that satisfaction of knowing that I did everything I could possibly do, really.
And thank you for sharing that. And I think it's important to know that you don't have to be a mental health first aider. You don't have to be a qualified nurse or a practitioner in the mental health space to help people. Purely being there for someone and lending an ear, like, in the same way that Winnie the Pooh were and his friends were there for Eeyore when he felt down, is really important. And I think sometimes people forget that actually having that connection and that community to share the feelings that you're having, it can be enough to lift people out of the darkness that they've plummeted into, and give them that hope in that day. And I know, you know, I've had the privilege of being able to help somebody not take their life that day, and they've told me that they didn't, purely by me having that intervention with them, and that is a beautiful thing. So I think it's wonderful that you both are giving people that baton of hope, and the whole point of the baton, I'm sure, is to be able to pass it on. So once you've been gifted with hope, and that hope has lifted your spirits, that you can then transfer that hope on to someone else. I'd love to learn more about. I'm super inspired by your baton of hope, by the way, because I think it's such a beautiful thing to create as an initiative. But I'd love for you to tell the audience more about what it's all about, and what I know from your connection that it was the loss of both of your sons, but what really inspired you to start the Baton of Hope, and what the vision of it is.
I think you kind of set it out there, Ruth. You know, that word hope. You know, suicide is very complex, and there are many different reasons for why people decide to take their own lives. But I think one common thread in almost all of them is the loss of hope. And I think, you know, you've mentioned COVID and the war in Ukraine and all of those kind of things. And it's been a difficult time for the world. And it just, from my point of view, you know, it just felt right. The time is right. You know, we need hope in our lives. And that's not just a throwaway bumper sticker. You know, hope can save lives, as you've said. And the baton of hope is about, again, another thing that you referred to there. It's about responsibility, because we can't and shouldn't leave it to the mental health professionals. We all have responsibility. We all have a role to play, even if it's just a hand on the shoulder of your best friend or brother or whatever, or an extra text to say, you know, are you really okay? It makes a difference. It can save lives. Simple things like that can save lives. So the baton represents responsibility in some ways, and we're passing it around, and hopefully it will find a final resting place in the Palace of Westminster as a reminder to politicians, legislators, policymakers, as they go about their everyday work, that now you take responsibility for the nation's mental health. You know, and let's concentrate on it in the same way that we focus on physical health. So it's a reminder. It represents the voices of those we've lost, and hopefully those voices can give a sense of hope to people who find themselves in the same dark place. And I think it's about universality as well, that we're all involved in this. You know, we are all involved in one of the biggest killers of people in the United Kingdom, the biggest killer of people under 35. We've all got a role to play.
Thank you for sharing that. How about for you, Steve?
Yeah, I think you know, the other thing here is that I think, you know, when Mike and I and you know, a group of others, you know, first had this conversation, I think one of the things we recognized was that, you know, there are a lot of amazing people, organizations, groups out there working in this suicide prevention space, and you know, we've seen, you know, the likes of the Three Dads Walking, and we got to meet Tim and Andy recently, and two of the dads, and you know, there's been some incredible initiatives, the Roman Kemp documentaries, Joe Wicks, and each of these in their own right have a massive impact and an influence, and over time you hope they might have a cumulative effect. The one thing we recognized was that some of those kind of come and go. Some last for a little bit longer, and the Three Dads are doing another walk in September, which is brilliant. We're hoping to Mike and I to go and join them at some point on the route. But we kind of looked at this and said, what can be done? What can be done? And I might use the term universality here, to to get everybody involved, not just in the 2 weeks that the Baton will tour the UK next summer, but there will be a legacy to what we do afterwards that we're currently working on with a series of charters around the health sector, for education, for government, for workplace cultures, for the general public. And these will form part of an ongoing legacy beyond that tour itself. And I think for us, that was one of the most important things. How can we have this really kind of universal impact that wasn't just, and I know Mike's used this term before, it wasn't just a shooting star event where everyone got really excited and then all went back to their normal lives again.
And I think the fact that it's a baton, I hope that baton continues, being carried for as long as possible, and it's carried by as many politicians as possible, to show their commitment to the cause, because I think it's something that needs to be continually passed on to keep that, almost to keep the hope alive, really, and to keep inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a political charter as well, and currently members of the organising committee that we have that have connections, quite extensive connections within politics, are currently engaging with politicians cross-party, having these conversations about their involvement and support. We know we've got the Department of Health and Social Care on side with us. Mike and I, of course, met a few weeks ago with the then Secretary of State for Health, Sajid Javid. Little did we know what was going to happen a few days later. But so we are having those conversations with government, and to say cross-party conversations as well. And it's really important that we pass the baton to them to see this through also.
And I know.
Can I just add that sort of one of the things? Sorry, Ruth. One of the things that we're keen to do is to challenge the status quo, because these suicide figures have stagnated for more than 20 years. There's some great work going on out there, but whatever it is we're doing, we're not having a significant impact on those suicide rates. And until we collectively, as a nation, can achieve that, we can't, in any sense, congratulate ourselves.
No.
In many areas, the support for people who are suicidal is woeful, and we have to accept that. We have to be honest about it. We have to have a conversation about it and not carry on sweeping this under the carpet. Part of what we're aiming to do is to normalize conversations around suicide. It has been swept under the carpet for far too long. There's far too much shame and stigma attached to the whole subject. And again, we've got to change that. It's something that we can afford to overlook no longer, we believe, at the Baton of Hope.
I think that's so important as well. I've had several guests on my show who have fortunately survived suicide, but made suicide attempts and planned suicide to the nth degree to make sure it would work. And actually, one of them guests, Daniel Mangana, who has Asperger's, who was meticulous in his planning, actually through the planning of it, realised he could leverage his knowledge from the planning to be a force for good. Unfortunately, he's still with us today, but I think it is so important that we not only look at the finality of the situation, but for your experience and your son Ross, is 10 years with depression. For me, is we did not serve him. The system did not serve him properly to help him out of that situation, to the point that he felt it necessary to take his own life to escape the pain that he was in. We have to do more, particularly for the younger generation, where CAMHS is overflowing. Parents are desperate to get support for their children, and that support is not available. And I recently went to a conference in London with the wonderful Dr. Chatterjee talking about the state of the National Health Service, and and many of the doctors there, publicly declared that it's a broken system. It's very good in some circumstances, but in the circumstance of mental health, it's very broken. We have guests on the show who 75% of a report done by the British Medical Journal, 75% of professionals in healthcare are struggling with their mental health. So we need to do something different.
And I think this is the point. Sorry, Ruth, for interrupting there, but I think if the system is not helping create hope, then we've got a real issue. In fact, I'll go further than that to say the system is removing hope quite often from people, and this is why there has to be a change, as Mike said, to the status quo.
Yeah. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Ultimately, you have to change it.
Ross is one of hundreds of thousands of people in the same situation, who go to the health service in crisis, and there are so many good, hardworking, underpaid people working in the mental health professions who are doing their absolute best to try and save people. But I think that the system itself is letting them down. I think it is glacial in the sense that, for example, with Ross, after 10 years of depression, asked for therapy and was sent away and put on a 6-month waiting list. And others that I've spoken to, and I've lost count now of the number of families that I've spoken to about this, who say that their sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers have been put on a similar waiting list for much longer than 6 months. If you turned up at the hospital doors with terminal cancer, nobody would say to you, go home and we'll see you again in 6 months' time. And I really think we've got to have a serious conversation about the neglect that surrounds mental health and the treatment of mental health in this country, and ask ourselves why there isn't parity of spending, attention, care, discussion, debate around mental health as there is around physical health. Switch on your television tonight, you'll get programs about how many calories you should be consuming, what food you should be eating, what your body should look like. All mainstream programs. Where are the programs about mental health and suicide prevention and all of those kind of anxiety and depression? Occasionally you get the odd gem, but there's a massive gap between the two.
I totally agree, and I think one of the other problems with it is that instant accessibility issue, that there are ways and means to create accessibility for people in a way that is instant, and it needs a much broader look at how we integrate people who work in the mental health space in the private sector, and integrate it into a solution for people at a local and a national level, and also even at a global level. For myself, obviously the work that I do, I work in mental health from a brain health coaching perspective, and many of my clients come to me because the system is not serving them, and obviously I serve them in the best way that I'm able to, and if I can't, then I reach out to professionals who can. But we have a system that relies as the first point of call is the doctor, and the doctors are more it's much harder to access the doctors in the UK now than it used to be, but based on the systems that they've created, certainly from my personal experience, and they're overwhelmed anyway.
And I think to add to that, Ruth, and I recently did an interview with Lady Dr. Sangeeta Mahajan. She's a consultant anaesthetist at Guy's Hospital, and she was telling me, the complete lack of parity between physical and mental health. Now, Sangeeta lost her son Sagar to suicide. He was just 20 years old, completely let down by a system that she thought she knew really well. And the issue, she said, is that if you look across the mental health system, from GPs to frontline mental health servicing staff, there is no suicide prevention training for any of them. You think, how in this day and age can a GP or somebody who is working on the mental health services team not have had suicide prevention training? It's just beggars belief, to be honest.
I'd love to dive into your 7 pillars around the mission, which I'm going to read out just to make it easy for everyone. And I know we've touched on some of these. Is your focus on boosting national conversation to eliminate stigma, connecting and collaborating with people already working to save lives, summarising key suicide prevention steps. And I think that is such an important one. Pointing people to simple, effective online training to help have suicide prevention conversations, better signposting, shining a spotlight on actions that don't support or actively harm people's mental health and showcase good practice. And I've been witness to how that's really affected my mum in a negative training that's really made her want to take her own life because it's been so negative. Positively changing UK government and public institutions to aim higher on suicide prevention. I think those are so fundamental. I just find it really shocking, I suppose is probably the word, that we don't have a handle on all of those as a nation to deliver the effective support. For you, what do you think is going to be the biggest needle mover? And I know there's obviously many needles that are moving at this time, but what for you is the biggest needle mover, Steve, to help change the conversation and give people hope?
Around changing the conversation, then if we look at one of the things you talked about there, which was kind of providing access to online training, for example, we know right now that there are many organizations, from the Ollie Foundation to the Zero Suicide Alliance to Assist Training. It's all out there. There's a lot of training that's available for free as well online. And I think if we could do one simple thing to move a needle, if every family went on a 20-minute basic fundamental how to have a conversation with a loved one or a family member or a friend who they thought might be struggling. How do I spot the signs? And how do I open up that conversation? And if I'm then concerned as a result of that conversation, what do I do and where do I signpost them? If we all knew how to do that, we're talking about fundamental first aid here, aren't we? Right now, I have still to this day never been on a first aid training course. If someone falls over and bashes their head in front of me, has a heart attack, I'm still not sure I would know what to do. Okay, so that's embarrassing on my part. I should have made the effort at some point. I haven't done. I'm sure there are courses I could go on today to learn how to do that, and I haven't made the effort. The same applies for mental health, and I think because we're seeing that kind of 2 in 5 people are experiencing a mental health problem in a country today. You're more likely to come across someone with a mental health problem than you are somebody falling over in front of you in the street in the way I've described. So I think if we could just get everybody to recognize that and everybody to learn some really simple fundamental skills and apply those skills, we'd already be moving the needle further down the line. And the charter for the general public and the whole Baton of Hope is about saying, you can do this. You said this earlier. Somebody used the term, I think it was Debbie Roberts from Ollie Foundation said, you don't need an ology to do this. You just need to learn some very simple basic skills and be willing to apply those skills. And we can all make a difference. So I think whether it's improving the mental health system, whether it's getting governments involved, all those factors are really important, which is why we have those 7 pillars or layers, whatever we describe them. But to echo what Mike said earlier, if we all just take a collective responsibility rather than passing the buck to someone else, then we can move the needle.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love to sort of chip in there in terms of helping people learn some basic skills, and we'll give some basic skills to people now. One of the best ways to help people have an open conversation that removes the shame, because I know we talked about this, is the shame on the person, and the person feels that they can't talk about it, is to ask the question, is everything okay? And the reason why this question is really powerful to the normal question, are you okay, is the you points the finger. Whereas when you ask the question, is everything okay, it allows the person to think about the things that are bothering them, that are causing to them to have trouble in their life in whatever way that may manifest. So the view goes outward to the environment, and outwardly rather than inwardly, and pointing, almost pointing a finger at the person, which makes the conversation an easier one to open up in terms of dialogue. Another thing that I think is really important for people is to have a check-in with themselves and their family as best they can, to find out how everyone is feeling, and to be openly talk about how they're feeling. And I know you both have kindly done that on this call, is talk openly about the feelings that are driving you at this time, not about how you want to feel, but how you're actually feeling in the present moment, and take the time to go deep inside and connect with your emotions is super important. So the first question is, how am I feeling? And write those emotions down. And the reason why it's so important to write those emotions down is because you get them out of your head and onto paper, or tell them out loud to somebody. So you get them out of your head and onto paper, and then you can get curious with them. So what we often find, just from a brain health perspective, is our emotional brain, which is the oldest part of our brain, is the one that runs us, is the one that makes us do things automatically. It's the one that's in the driving seat most of the time. It's the one that's on when we're asleep. And when we take the time to write things down, and when we take the time to think, pause for 10 seconds, because it takes 10 seconds to activate our prefrontal cortex to get the thinking part of our brain working, we give ourselves permission to pause. We give ourselves permission to connect with our emotions, but also to look at them subjectively, and then get curious with them, not furious. So it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel hopeless. It's okay to have any emotion, because an emotion is just a signal that either wants to move us towards something that is generally good, or away something which is normally away from pain. So an emotion is a signal, and every emotion is valid. So that's why it's so important for us to check in with how we're feeling, and ask people other people to take the time to check in with how they're feeling, which is the first pillar of brain health, feelings, and to give yourselves permission to get curious with those feelings. And once you get curious, not furious with them, you then give yourself that power to do something positive with them. So sometimes we can get really angry, okay? And I know that some of the deep emotions behind yourself, Mike, and Steve, is anger associated with the system being broken and the support not being there. But you guys are using it in a really positive way. So you're leveraging the power of what we might see as a negative emotion, but you're using it as a force for good. So I hope that helps for those that are listening, is really take the time to check in with your emotions. Ask people, is everything okay? That then opens the conversation for them to look at what's bothering them. Is everything okay? You look at the whole life situation. Obviously, there's lots of questions you can ask beneath that, and then they can take the time to get curious with their emotions, And once you get curious, you can start to unravel how you can use those emotions in a positive way, and look at the thought patterns, the thinking patterns, and the drivers behind those emotions. And then you can start to unpick and unravel them, and take back control of your mental health and your brain health. So I hope that helps in the context of that. So I'd love to dive into the 5 pillars now, because I know we've just talked about it briefly. And the 5 pillars is looking at the facts. So we say, let's look at the facts behind our situation as to how we're feeling, our actions, our connections to ourselves and to others, our thoughts and our surroundings. So Mike, I'm just going to dive into a couple of questions here. So if we talk about connection to yourself, what's the most important value that guides you in life?
Wow. That's a really difficult one. I'm a big believer in, well, if I can mention a few things, honesty, humility, I think is a kind of almost outdated value, and gratitude. Somebody told me very early on in the sort of grieving process that, if you can learn to appreciate even the most basic little things that you take for granted, that will help you. And I've recognized the value of that. At first I was a bit skeptical, because I just didn't think that anything so basic was going to change. But yeah, gratitude I think is a huge thing, and the just humility, sort of, accepting and listening to other people. We all talk a lot about talking, and that's obviously very, very important. But the listening thing sometimes is harder, but it's absolutely vital. I run a few groups for men called Talk Club, and I always say to people, it's called Talk Club, but it's actually Talking and Listening Club. So I don't know if they sort of fit in with the question that you're asking, Ruth, but yeah,
that's totally it does. It does.
Good.
And I love the fact that you mentioned gratitude, because when I first lost my father, my mum was in a really dark place, and actually gratitude was the thing that we focus on every day. At the end of every day, the question I would ask my mum is, what are you grateful for? And we'd look for the positives at the end of each day. And it could be quite hard. Sometimes, the positive is, I'm grateful that I woke up and heard the birds singing in the morning. I'm grateful that I was able to get out of bed. And it's focusing on the positive things that are helping us lift our spirits in whatever way is right for that person, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and even if I can say in relation to my own grief, to try to be grateful for the time that we had with Ross, grateful for the love we shared, and just sort of, I don't know, I'm just sort of thankful for every day that we had with him. And I think to kind of try, at least, it's not easy sometimes, because you're so overwhelmed with the grief of it, but to try sometimes to sort of look at your loss through that prism, again, it's certainly helped me, and I'm grateful for the advice that I was given to try and find gratitude in sometimes smaller things, as you say.
Absolutely, and it can make a huge difference. It's often the small steps that can actually make the biggest difference for people, because it helps give you momentum going forward. And those little steps, no one climbs a mountain in one big leap. You have to take the little steps, and it's the little steps, they all add up. And it's such a fundamental piece of mental health. Actually, it is gratitude journaling. Has been shown to be so effective scientifically, gratitude journaling, to lift people's level of happiness. and obviously it raises their level of hope as well. So thank you for sharing that. And for Steve, you, in terms of connection to others, who's been your role model in your life?
Actually, it's interesting when you asked me that question before we came on air, Ruth. I was trying to think who's been the one person, and I think that's an impossible question to answer, because during this journey since losing Jordan, 32 months ago, there have been so many. I could name so many of them as well, and in most cases they are people who have been in the same position as Mike and I, and most cases, have lost loved ones to suicide, who have just gone out there and done some incredible things. People like Alice Hendy that we can mention, that set up Ripple from Debbie Rogers and Sean's place in Liverpool. I knew I shouldn't have started naming people, because there are going to be people I'm going to forget people. That's my concern, is that I'll forget people that I'd absolutely want to mention. And I won't embarrass Mike by saying Mike as well here, but there are when you see those people, and look, I think the thing that mustn't be lost for anyone listening to this today, and Mike referred to this, Mike lost Ross last year. Okay, it's now 32 months for me. Now that is still a blink of an eye in many respects, but people like Alice, similarly, just over a year ago. There's Lizzie DeGeorge out there. There's just so many people that I can think of who've lost people very recently, and I don't know who had a conversation with them in the beginning, or whether it was just something they decided to do. And I just remember a really good friend of mine just saying, "You've got a choice now." He said, "You can either sit on the sofa with a bottle," and that was definitely an option, the way I was feeling, everything we were going through. Or you can get out there and make something of this. He said, "I kind of know you," and they said, "I think I know what you're going to do." So he maybe knew me better than I knew myself at the time. But I think we mustn't forget that there are so many people out of huge trauma. And I once learned this, many years ago, where somebody said, I can't remember who it was, that even out of the worst set of circumstances, the worst event, something good always comes afterwards. And you could probably look at that from a perspective of war, famine, economic downturns. There will always be something that comes out of it. And I think this comes right back to the gratitude piece, to recognizing that we should continually look for what is the good that can come out of this, because the moment you don't look for the good is the moment you lose the hope.
Yeah, and thank you for raising that. It just brought me back to when I lost a child through pregnancy as a miscarriage, and everything felt really hopeless. And actually reflecting back on that experience, when all your hopes and dreams feel shattered at the time from the loss, it is finding some meaning and finding something that you can hold on to, that you can learn from, and that you can take action on from that experience to move yourself forward in life is so important.
I think a great question you can ask yourself whenever you're in any of those positions, and it was Anthony Robbins, I remember, the motivational speaker from the States, this question. I was listening to one of his tapes back in the 90s, and he just said, what's good about this? And he said, I know what you're thinking. Nothing is good about this. He said, I know that, but if there was something good about it, what would it be? And just being determined to ask that question and look for the answer, it might just give you that first step, to moving forward again.
Thank you for sharing. That's really powerful. I'd love to explore your journey on the Baton of Hope, because I know it's happening next summer 2023, and where you're heading. So could you just give a brief overview as to where it's starting, how people can get involved, how we can get the community working together across the country to really pass this baton of hope around as many for it to touch as many people as possible, really, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
I think, if I can say so, Ruth, and this is no disrespect to any of the fantastic charities out there, I think one of the differences with Baton of Hope is that, we don't say, here we are, this is what we provide, come to us. We say, what is it? What do you, the people, think we need to shine a spotlight on? We'll come to you. You tell us where you want us to go, what you want us to highlight as best practice. So we can't tell you the exact route at the moment, and I'm not sure when we will be able to, because it's a very organic thing. We'll have to decide sooner or later exactly what the route will be. But the whole idea of it is that, it's people feeding into us, and anybody who's got any idea, who wants to be involved, they can register their interest on our website, www.batonofhopeuk.org. They can tell us how they would like to fit in, whether they could do some local fundraising, whether they're aware of a great little charity that, goes mostly overlooked, whether they'd like to sort of set up their own project and that kind of thing. We'll, as I say, we'll have to finalize the route, and we'll get around as many parts of the UK as we possibly can within those 2 weeks. But remember, it's not just about those 2 weeks. It's about every day. From the moment we thought of Baton of Hope, it was every day counts. Every day will count up to the tour. Every day of the tour will count. Every day following the tour will count. At the moment, we're focused on making this one initiative as huge a success as we can. But I think Steve will agree that in the back of our minds, we are hoping it's going to be an annual thing. We need support, and we're getting it. And thank you to all of those who've given us their support so far. Sorry, Steve.
Do we get a year off for a rest though, Mike, or not?
2 days maybe, Steve.
Mike summed it up perfectly. This is unlike some wonderful organisations out there. This is not about us setting up a charity saying we do this, follow our lead, and that we want to be the catalyst to get the whole population involved. And I've used this analogy. It's not official. It's not in our brochure, but I've used this a few times. We've just had the Queen's Jubilee. Now, unfortunately, I was away on holiday and missed that completely, but I'm pretty certain this is how it worked, that the Queen stayed down in Buckingham Palace, had her own party there. Well, we do know because Paddington was there, so we saw that happening. What I don't think she did was travel up to North Yorkshire and Harrogate, where I live. She didn't drive into our cul-de-sac, set up the trestle tables and the bunting, and then nip back to Buckingham Palace. Fairly certain that didn't happen, but as I say, I wasn't here. What happened was we knew this Jubilee was happening. We all wanted to be a part of it, and we all put our bunting out, and we all got our tea parties out, and we all got together.
Yeah,
that's what this is. We'll provide the guidance, we'll provide the guidelines, we'll provide the momentum, but the momentum will then build from there. And as long as what you're doing opens up the conversation about suicide, helps raise awareness, and can demonstrate, as well as Mike said, whether it's a small charity, a big charity, whatever it would be, practical solutions that are making a difference, and we can raise awareness about those, then that's what this is about. And I might use the term organic. In lots of ways, it will be organic. We're not going to know what's going on in Shetland or Guernsey, where people are already reaching out to us. We're hoping they're going to share their stories with us, and we can share them on social media, and we can share them on our websites. But we can't be there. We've got 2 weeks to get one baton around all 4 nations of the UK. So we're going to say to everyone, you do your thing in your school, in your business, in your community. Tell us what you're doing, and make this as big as the Jubilee.
Wow, I love that. And I think, in the same way that the Jubilee did, is for people to really get on your website and register what you propose to do in your part of the country, what initiatives you're going to put in place as part of the Baton of Hope, who you're going to get connected with, who you're going to get involved, how you're going to build that community awareness. and that community support that is so essential, that goes beyond the borders of the NHS, beyond the borders of the health service, local practices, and make it really such a collaborative experience, so that everybody can share, learn, and grow, and raise awareness that this is, like you said, Mike and Steve, it's the number one killer of people who are 35 and 35 and younger, and it's such it's flatline. We're not all of the interventions at the moment are not significantly improving the number of people who feel the need to use it as a means to escape the pain that they're experiencing, and I think it's such an important initiative. So I am excited to get involved, and I've already registered on the website. I'm happy to offer trauma recovery group coaching, which can be done content free for people who haven't been able to unchain their pain through the normal vocal routes that's traditionally offered. So that will be available as part of your initiative, and we can do that anywhere, any place, anywhere, because it's also online. So that will be part of my contribution to support you and your initiative. So thank you, Mike and Steve. It's been just such a wonderful conversation, and such an important one, and I'm really looking forward to the Baton of Hope and getting involved and learning more about all of the people that you've managed to get involved throughout the country, and all the celebrities that you are lining up. Are you able to share any names of people that are part of it?
It's in progress. Apart from Mike and I, you mean? So
well, apart from you and Mike, but obviously you've got a team already supporting you in the background.
I won't share it, but we have an affectionate nickname for Mike and I in our team, following our appearance on BBC, but probably inappropriate to share with the public at this stage. But it's part of the plans we're working on at the moment. But yeah, we have a number of names in the frame, and once we get into September and our social media platforms go live, and we can start engaging and sharing those. So
from September you'll have your social media platforms up, so that's really great.
Yeah, so that's public now, Mike. We've just made that announcement. So there we go.
We've got to stick to it. We're talking to a number of sort of very well-known and influential people, Ruth, and fingers crossed. We've had indications that whoever we've approached virtually so far has just loved the idea and wanted to be part of it. So we're very hopeful that we'll get people from all walks of life to take part. And who knows? Maybe one day, if we sort of look back, we can hope that this was a trigger, a sea change, a game changer in suicide prevention. And who knows? Maybe we can go beyond the shores of the UK one day.
Do you know what I think that?
Maybe I'm getting carried away now. Yeah.
No, I think that's a very real possibility. Is that the baton gets carried beyond the borders of the United Kingdom and around the world, and there are no barriers to stopping this initiative. I think it's a fantastic one, and it's such one that is so needed, not just at a national level but at an international level. So really well done, both of you, for putting this together. And just a reminder that people, if just to register, get involved, get your community involved, do register at the batonofhopeuk.org, and you can find out more on their social media. LinkedIn, you're very active on, both of you, aren't you? So you can find both of them there too, and learn more about what they're doing, and share. I encourage people to share their stories of hope as part of this, so that they can give hope to others too. Mike and Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for your time, because I know you are super, super busy in all that you do.
Thank you, Ruth. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for your interest. Thank you.